Yeah, and the technology enablement certainly helps small teams to scale. The other point I wanted to reference from what you said earlier was you've shifted from primarily making content or curating content towards an enabling function. You're enabling the business to go content first. And the example that you gave, the SME had great feedback because they were able to make content themselves easily. Now, this is a message that I've seen across various businesses, that we interact with SMEs. The SMEs come to learning departments and they ask for learning interventions, whether it's content or courses or whatever. And the job of the learning department is to service those SMEs, to service their needs, to keep those stakeholders happy. And if you can put tools in their hands such that they can do things themselves, then that's another mechanism to keep them happy. But what was the feedback of the learners? Because usually when you have large or established learning departments that make content, you will have roles like graphic designers, media designers, instructional designers, people who are professionals in doing that thing. And the output that comes from a professional designer usually is way different to the output that comes from somebody who's never really seen the tool before, but you pushing a couple of buttons. They find it easy, great, they're happy, but what they produce, it's not always amazing. So what did the learners say about this?
Right. I agree. I think that ability, when you have expertise like in instructional design, is going to create that different output that you refer to. Whereas, an SME, that's not their expertise, is it? I mean, they have that expertise in a particular area of topics or content, but they're not necessarily going to create that, engaging learning experience that leads to the results that we look for. And I agree. And I think part of it is the first phase is, of course, get them engaged in the first place to use, for example, technology to help them create and distribute content where we don't have the capacity because, as we talked about, the small team. That is a first phase. Now, does that mean to say what they're producing is at the highest level? Probably not. But it is the first phase, I think, of course, of sort of shifting from headquarters level team-based content creation to that sort of creating autonomy. Now, our role, therefore, has also having to shift, is to spend that much more time with the SMEs to, instead of creating content for them, is to say, right, go ahead and create the draft, and we're going to give you some tips of how you can improve it from a, let's say, educational point of view. Now, can we do that at scale? I think that's what we're still looking into. But I think, once again, our focus has shifted in terms of where is that support taking place with SMEs. Compared to before, it was like, okay, tap into them, and then we'll try to tap into their knowledge, and then we would take on the heavy workload, right, of creating the content and the courses. Now we've kind of said, okay, you can take on some of the heavy workload, and we will then support you on that journey by creating, giving you some ingredients or tips of how you can make it more effective. So it's slightly shifted. Coming back to the point of that example I gave earlier, that conversation I just had with SME, the reaction of the learner, because I did ask about that, was extremely positive. There was no doubt that they said, well, this was great. This was different. It was better than just sitting through 60 minutes, because they did a much shorter form course, let's say, with some AI avatars included. So the way it was done and the way it was described certainly seemed, at least in this moment, to be effective, and the feedback was very positive.
So, yeah, let me just ask a little bit more about that. So typically with because you mentioned avatars, I've been writing a paper on avatars for a while. It's a bit late, but anyway, I'm still doing it. Doing a little bit of research in that space. Now, when you present learners with something that is new, something that is novel, something that they haven't seen before, the feedback's usually going to be good. If you, for example, I'm not saying that you have done this, but I'm getting the feeling that maybe you have, is you put a license for Synthesia, Colossi, and HeyGen, some kind of avatar tool, in the hands of an SME, enabled them to make that content, potentially using templates and things like that. Learners are going to find that different if you weren't doing it before. That's subtly different to their learning, or you getting a better learning outcome, or they would be positively surprised by the fact that it came from an SME. Now, as an ex-scientist, I'm looking at this as an experiment, right? Are you comparing one thing to another? That's not always the case in corporates anyway. But with all of that being said, what you've presented was, there's phase one is making change happen at the point of the SME, finding out if learners are satisfied with that stuff. But you said phase one. So the obvious question is, what's the end game? Where do you want to go with this? Because one of the things that I have said in a handful of webinars and a couple of conference speeches is that we are rapidly getting to a point where the technology that's available to us, the AI, nebulous AI, whatever you want to mean by that, is capable of producing drafts, producing designs, producing storyboards, rapidly producing visually stunning content. If that's the case, then what is the role for some of the people who might be watching this who are in that instructional design, graphic design space? If I'm saying these kinds of things, that AI could be doing what you do, and the kind of thing that you're saying is we want to democratize and put tools in the hands of SMEs so they can reach their learners more quickly. We have a group of people who previously were making content. And the end game for those folks is, to me, it's probably a reskilling or redeployment exercise. But what do you think? What's your transformational goal? What's your end game?
Yeah, and that's a tough one. I mean, as do we all have the answers? I don't think so. That it would be great to have a crystal ball, but I think, as I said earlier, the role that we play as learning and development. As I said, being a small team, we're more generalists. I don't have an expert instructional designer. I have someone who's very good. Who's good with the technology and the platform, and they've got that role, right, to be that support. Is their background in structural design? No, but we are playing a generalist role, and I think that in itself has a strength because we're able to say that how do we adapt ourselves and where are we going as a team with the support we're providing to the business. And I think coming back to the whole phase of now performance support seems to be a much greater, I'm finding that, I'm not saying that's for everyone, but rather than just the courses, is like performance support. How our people are learning is shifting as well. I believe in the power of how search is going to change the game. AI powered search within learning and knowledge systems we've got to shift that mindset. So what skills do we need to have that need to evolve, that is moving from the traditional way of what we were doing to what is going to be required for the coming years? Again, we don't know necessarily what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4 years. Who predicted where we would have been today 2 or 3 years ago? Very few people, to be honest. And I think I feel the same way right now when it comes to learning and development. What I do know is what value are we bringing? Always ask you that question. What value are we bringing? What is the business saying about what we're doing as output? And by the way, this is not just about the technology. So let's go back to that. We've just now launched a management development program, a revised version of something we used to do years ago, but now with the latest technology as a support and an enablement for management development, using AI simulations, for example. So I think the awareness of how AI is augmenting, I'm sorry, again, using words that are more cliches, but yes, indeed, augmenting the development journeys of employees. How can AI support that process? All of that has to be the skills that we need to have. And then putting those building blocks in place with the relevant initiatives like leadership development programs or upskilling programs, for example. So I know I haven't answered your question clearly at all because I don't have the answer. But the bottom line
Yeah.
is we, as any, I think, employee nowadays in the world we live in, have to continuously evolve our skills to be able to bring that value. And then you have to define what the heck that value is, right, to the business.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
it mean to say that some roles in learning and development might be having to change more than others, like instructional designers? The answer, I think, is yes, absolutely. I think instructional designers need to find a way of saying, what is our purpose? They're going to be brilliant designers, but while more and more people bring that technology into their own hands to create content, maybe how do instructional designers, like I mentioned earlier, support that process? What is their new role they have to play compared to what they used to do 1 or 2 or 3 years ago?